Hallo, ich bin Dave, der Gründer von Halloween Jahrround und fröhlich Krampus Nacht. For those who actually speak German, allow me to apologize for butchering the language. But I'm very excited because tonight is Krampus night. Contrary to what people think, Krampus does not come on Christmas Eve like Santa does. I know everyone thinks that like he's Santa's, other half is his evil doppelganger, but because the feast of St. Nicholas was on December 6th, Krampus night is actually the night of the 5th, which is tonight. So I wanted to commemorate the occasion by giving you guys a ranking of every Krampus movie. Now, before we get started, just a bit of history for those who are unfamiliar. Krampus is a figure of German folklore, but he's really present in a lot of Central and Eastern European countries' history. He's this sort of demonic figure who, contrary to Santa Claus, comes and takes away children who are being naughty. Sometimes he takes them to hell. Sometimes he kills them. It really depends on how messed up of a version you're being told of the story. But if the original Grimm's fairy tales are any indication, they can get pretty disturbing. So I thought it would be great to kick off December with a new Christmas set, a new Christmas everything, because despite the name of this channel, Halloween Year-Round, I love Christmas, and I love Christmas horror. So this will be the first of several Christmas horror-related things that we'll be doing this month. Stay tuned every Saturday. I want to just go over what counts and what doesn't count. So, surprisingly, there's not a whole lot of media attention for Krampus before, 2013. I found all these movies are within the last decade, and even, on TV appearances, it's not much before recently. But I'm only going to be considering theatrical movies that he appears in or is a major part of. So, if he appeared on an episode of a TV show, I'm not counting that. I'm not counting, random YouTube short films, which I'm sure there's a bunch, and as entertaining as many of them are, there's too many to count. I'm going to break my rule later, but I'll explain that when we get to it. And I also decided I was initially going to include Mother Krampus and Mother Krampus 2. However, upon further research, those aren't really about Krampus himself. They are about a different mythological figure. So I decided that even though, they bear Krampus in the title, that they technically shouldn't count because it's not about Krampus. So for ranking criteria, I broke it down into 3 criteria. Number 1, how well made is it? How good is the directing, the writing, the acting? Just how good of a movie is it from a movie critic's cinematic perspective? Number 2, how well does it incorporate Krampus and Christmas into the story? Because there's going to be some on here that are just totally different movies where Krampus just kind of feels tacked on there as an afterthought. And finally, number 3, how fun was it? This is where ones that maybe weren't as well made can get some points just for being so bad they're fun, and others are so bad that they're bad. And we'll get to that. So, who's ready to jump in the Krampus spirit of the season and start this countdown? Here we go. Number 8, Krampus the Christmas Devil. So this one is probably the worst made out of all of them. I myself have dabbled in, independent local filmmaking, and this felt like one of the things I've seen from there, but on the lower. This felt like the stuff that we were making early on. The writing, the acting, it's very hammy and not always in a fun way. There's a couple of moments where it is kind of so bad it's fun, but its core, it's not even a Christmas movie. It's not even really a Krampus movie. It's like this gritty detective thriller that's like trying to be Seven, but with Krampus. And while I did like, I'll give it this. I kind of liked what they did where like Krampus is a henchman of Santa and he's the one kind of behind it all. And we get what I call Mob Boss Santa, which he's the best part of this not very good movie. So I liked that aspect of it. I liked that idea. And I wouldn't mind seeing that concept played out better in another movie. But for this one, it's not over the top cheesy enough to be fun like The Room. It's just cheesy and kind of boring. So, sorry, Krampus the Christmas Devil. Number 7, Krampus Origins. So this one, it's actually a better movie than some of the other ones you're going to see higher on this list. I have it so low because it was the most disappointing one for me out of all of them. You know, I went into this and I saw, oh, it's set during World War I. You know, I thought back to like the famous Christmas truce that occurred in 1914. I'm a big history buff. I was a history major in college. So, you know, anytime a horror movie goes historical, I eat it up. And I was kind of expecting that with this. So I went into it with kind of higher expectations than the others, which maybe that's my fault. Maybe I shouldn't blame the movie, but I will. So we get like the cool World War I concept for maybe the first 10 minutes, and then it just spends the rest of the movie in a boarding school. It was kind of a letdown because I was expecting a lot out of it, and it was just kind of dull. I will admit it had a cool Krampus design. Krampus himself I really liked in it, but I wasn't really a fan of its story or its plot. It felt like it was just trying to do a generic, you know, haunted boarding school movie with Krampus just kind of thrown in there as an afterthought, which I take issue with, because when you promised me a Krampus war movie, I at least wanted to like feature as the primary setting, and this one it didn't. Number 6, Krampus the Reckoning. Now, as a movie itself, this one, it's got a cool premise. You know, there's like this weird murder mystery involving this little girl and her, you know, foster parents dying. And it reminded me a bit of Orphan, if you're a fan of that. So I liked what it was doing as just from a premise standpoint. It was interesting. But again, you know, like so many of the movies on this list, it's just doing its own separate thing, and then it's like, oh, we're gonna throw Krampus in here and put Krampus in the title, and then randomly decide that it's a Christmas movie. Which, granted, it's a bit more Christmassy than some of the other ones, but Krampus, I felt, was just... It's sort of like in the later Hellraiser sequels, where you could tell they started off as completely separate scripts, and then some, you know, producer said, hey, let's just slap Hellraiser on the title, throw Pinhead in there, even if it doesn't fit, and we'll call it a Hellraiser sequel. I feel like that's happening with some of these movies, where they started off as different scripts, and they just said, put Krampus in there, it'll be a Christmas horror movie, and that'll be our in. So, I mean, I don't want to... It kept me more intrigued than some of the other ones, but I hated how little Krampus had to do with it. And then when we do see Krampus, this one lost points for this. Krampus's design is like that PlayStation 1 CGI. I want to compare it to the Scorpion King in The Mummy Returns, except that looked better. So, interpret that as you will. Number 5, Krampus 2, The Devil Returns. It's the return of Mob Boss Santa. How can you not love that? So this one is actually a direct sequel to Krampus the Christmas Devil, where we have Santa as like the boss, ordering hits on children, which, Krampus, his assassin, is carrying out. We get some of the same characters coming back and dealing with the aftermath and fallout of what happened in the first one. It's a little higher on the list because it's definitely better made than the first one was. The first one just felt like, a couple people with a camcorder threw it together. This one actually felt, more cinematic and like, like a legitimate movie. So I give it props for that. I give them credit for, I'm sure they were working with a low budget both times, but, they really made improvements from a technical perspective. From a story perspective, it's still not quite a Krampus or Christmas movie, It's really about, like, this biker guy who's mad at the detective for killing his brother, and it's like this revenge story with, the mob, and, somewhere in there is Santa and Krampus, getting children. But it just feels like that's not treated with the same, it's not given as much time or energy that the movie does to the detective plot. It would have been a little bit lower, but it had probably my favorite line I've ever heard in a Christmas movie, where they realize that, Santa is the one behind it, and one of the guys just yells, "Hey, fuck you, Santa!" And I laughed for like 3 minutes straight. I can't... You can't top that! Show me the Tim Allen movie where somebody else fuck you, Santa, and I'll put that on the list. Number 4, Night of the Krampus. Alright, so remember how I said that I was going to break one of my own rules and I would explain why? So this one, I found it on Amazon Prime. It wasn't like a short film I found on YouTube. It's only like 20-some minutes long, but what it does in those 20 minutes is very effective. You can tell that it's done on a very low budget. I'm pretty sure it's, it's like a student film. It has that look and feel. But it's a well-made student film. For what it is, they make the most of their premise. They treat it as like this cool mystery where, Krampus is this... It does what Krampus the Christmas Devil couldn't do in an hour and a half. This does in like 20 minutes and does it more effectively. So I know I shouldn't count that against the other ones because this one's so short, but because it was so short, it had to be concise. It had to, it used its time perfectly, and it didn't need to be any longer. I think that had this one dragged on for an hour and a half, I might have more issues with it, but just as it is, it's like this perfect, tight, compressed, concise little Krampus story that it worked for me. Number 3, Krampus Unleashed. Wait, do you mean to tell me that on this list is a Krampus movie that actually feels like a Christmas movie that features Christmas as its primary plot and uses Krampus effectively with great makeup effects and is actually a pretty decent horror movie just on its own? You're lying. No, I'm not lying. It's Krampus Unleashed. So I've made it no secret the first couple movies on this list, I'll never watch them again. I really only did it for this one. Krampus Unleashed is the first one on here that I would watch it again. I actually really enjoyed this one. It has all the normal makings of a good Christmas movie. It deals with awkward family members, and it's actually... The awkwardness feels so genuine, it's both cringe-inducing and hilarious at the same time for anyone who's ever experienced that in real life with, family on holidays. But, so it uses that well... And it features Krampus as a primary plot point, and it's well done. The makeup is awesome. The kills are I cannot stress how much I enjoyed this one. And maybe I'm praising it too much just because, I watched this one kind of later, in my viewings, where I'd already seen a bunch of the other, terrible ones. So maybe that's kind of affecting my decision. But, it was one that I felt had a good plot. It was well built up. The ending, bit exposition. You know how when you get to the end of a horror movie and then the villain just basically explains everything and monologues it for like 5 minutes straight? It is guilty of that, but again, it has a cool suspenseful build-up. It actually feels like a Christmas movie, so, it gets you in the spirit. And it was the most fun I had watching any of the new movies on this list. I say new ones because the numbers 1 and 2 I'd already seen before, so of all the movies I had to watch for the first time, this was the one I enjoyed the most. And, I might watch it again sometime this month, and I recommend you guys do too. Number 2, A Christmas Horror Story. I absolutely love this movie. It's streaming on Shudder. If you're interested, or if you have it, if you're watching this channel, you should have Shudder. And while Krampus is not the primary focus of the whole movie, it's an anthology, he's the primary focus of one of the stories, and he's featured in another one. So that's enough for me. I love his design in it. This is a Krampus that we see a lot of, and we see him being very active. We see him in action. We see him fighting. We get a Santa Claus versus Krampus fight that no other movie on this list dares to give us. Even the other stories in this are a lot of fun. You have like the creepy haunted school. You have a really disturbing story about a changeling. You get a zombie outbreak at the North Pole, which has a twist that I won't spoil, but it's one of the most holy shit twists I've ever seen in a movie. But it feels a lot like either Trick or Treat or Tales of Halloween, but for Christmas. And I'd love to see that done with more holidays. So, if you haven't seen A Christmas Horror Story, definitely check it out. It's not only one of my favorite Krampus movies, it's one of my favorite Christmas movies. And finally, number 1, Krampus. Is anyone really surprised? Like, is anyone... When I started this, when I decided to do this video and I committed to watching all these movies, I was hoping to find one that could be number 1 other than this movie. And I don't mean that as an insult to this movie. I love this movie, but I feel like it kind of wins by default just because it is the most well-made. It is a lot of fun, and it's all about Krampus, and, he's the primary villain and really the primary focus of the movie. But this was done with Hollywood money, from director Mike Dougherty, whom you know from Trick or Treat. But it's a great movie. It's a lot of fun. Its tone is a little all over the place. It does, like, Christmas Vacation, and then it does Gremlins, and then it does, like, almost The Shining with kind of how eerie and creepy everything is, Quiet in the Snow. It's a fun movie, and, I watch it every year, but I wish it didn't win number 1 just by default. Now, it wins number 1 because it was the best, but I wish that there were other Krampus movies on this level that could compete. So, if you are a filmmaker out there, please make more good Krampus movies, because, again, as I said earlier, there's not a whole lot before the last decade. So, I think that Krampus he's starting to take over in the pop culture zeitgeist, and I think that there's a lot more to be done with him. And yes, it wins number 1. It's definitely my favorite movie on the list. It only edges out Christmas Horror Story slightly for me, though. And my point is, I'd love to do this list again in another 10 years, where there are more movies on par with Krampus and A Christmas Horror Story. So, let's do it. But until then, as always, you can follow Halloween Year Round on Facebook and Twitter. You can check out the website, www.halloweenyearround.com. I will be back next week where we will be doing something else with Christmas horror movies that may or may not involve some sort of chart or ranking system. You'll just have to wait and see. But until then, like always, stay scared, and remember, every day is Halloween or Christmas in December. But then come January, every day is Halloween again. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe, or Krampus will come take you in your sleep.